Venezuelan Foreign Minister Jorge Arreaza held a meeting on Thursday with Russian Deputy Prime Minister Yuri Borisov to strengthen cooperation between the two countries. An early summer heat wave in Europe has seen people flock to parks and other public spaces, sparking concerns about new COVID-19 outbreaks. Pakistani authorities have suspended over 260 pilots as part of an investigation into the authenticity of their licenses. From the headquarters of Telesur English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South, and I'm Katrina Goss. We begin in Russia, where Venezuelan Foreign Minister Jorge Arreaza held a meeting on Thursday with Russian Deputy Prime Minister Yuri Borisov to reinforce cooperation between the two countries. Arreaza was visiting Russia as part of the activities to mark the 75th anniversary of Victory Day. During his meeting with the Deputy Prime Minister, Arreaza offered thanks to Russia on behalf of the Venezuelan people for its support throughout the years. The two officials also evaluated projects related to strategic cooperation, in particular in the health and energy fields. Venezuelan Foreign Minister Jorge Arreaza noted in a press conference from Russia, where he attended the Victory Day celebrations, that his government shares the vision of a multipolar world based on UN principles.
We share this vision of multipolar world based on collective decisions, through multilateralism, the strengthening of the United Nations, respect for the Charter of the United Nations. That's why yesterday I also spoke with Minister Lavrov to activate, even in the midst of the pandemic, a group of countries in defense of this chapter, the United Nations chapter, with its principle and objective clearly established.
And the Venezuelan Foreign Minister also denounced the US attacks on the Venezuelan people through unilateral sanctions and stressed that the International Court of Justice should consider these measures crimes against humanity.
We submitted a file with all the declarations, communiques, speeches from those that govern the United States, the President, Vice President, State Department, National Security Council, among others, which contains their confessions regarding the aggressions against Venezuela, which pursues a political objective of regime change. They have made the Venezuelan people suffer, and there have been consequences for human lives, consequences in terms of disease, and in some way, they confess this in those declarations.
And Arreaza also noted that several international organizations have called for the suspension of unilateral sanctions against Venezuela, Iran and Cuba to allow these countries to use all available resources to combat the COVID-19 pandemic.
Several reporters have made statements. The International Red Cross has issued a statement. Several governments and regional organizations have issued statements calling for the lifting of sanctions against Venezuela, against Iran, and the criminal blockade against Cuba. There have been those who have proposed the suspension of the sanctions during the COVID-19 pandemic, out of pure humanity, to allow these governments that suffer aggressions to use their resources.
Argentina is monitoring the movement of a 15-square-kilometre locust swarm in the country's northeast. The food safety body said the swarm, which initially entered Argentina from Paraguay in late May, contained about 40 million insects. At the moment, the locusts are in the province of Corrientes, near the borders with Brazil, Uruguay and Paraguay. However, experts note the swarm has not yet caused significant damage to crops. Brazil's Senate has approved a bill that paves the way for the privatization of water and sanitation companies. The bill was strongly criticized by social movements and citizens who consider water a public good. But lawmakers who supported the bill argued that it will help bring running water to the homes of 35 million Brazilians. Nonetheless, the Workers' Party questioned the claims. The bill will now need to be signed into law by President Jair Bolsonaro. A number of hospitals in Bolivia have partially closed their doors due to a lack of supplies and protective equipment. Thorax Hospital in La Paz said it will not reopen its doors until all the necessary biosecurity conditions are in place, as 8 health workers have tested positive for COVID-19. A similar situation has been seen in Hollandis Hospital, which closed its doors after 36 workers tested positive for the virus. Meanwhile, a number of labs have declared themselves in a state of emergency as they are lacking the proper equipment to process COVID-19 tests. Honduran health workers continue to protest for better protective equipment as COVID-19 infections increase among hospital personnel. The Honduran Medical Association and the Social Security Institute have stressed that the population is at the mercy of a corrupt government. They also highlighted mismanagement of the pandemic by President Juan Orlando Hernández, which has led to a severe health emergency. The COVID-19 virus has so far infected 4.7 million people across the Americas. The United States remains the worst hit nation in the world, having reported over 2.4 million cases and over 124,000 deaths. Meanwhile, Brazil is the second hardest hit nation worldwide, with over 1.2 million cases and more than 54,000 fatalities. Peru ranks 7th worldwide with over 264,000 cases, followed by Chile with over 259,000. And earlier this Thursday, our correspondent in Havana, Laura Palmero, brought us a roundup of news from the Caribbean and Latin America.
Thank you so much for the contact. Let's take a look at the most recent stories affecting the Caribbean countries and Cuba this Thursday. CARICOM Chair and Barbados Prime Minister Mia Mottley has expressed the bloc's dissatisfaction with the political crisis in Guyana following the March 2nd elections. She was speaking during an exclusive interview with Trinidad and Tobago CNC3.
We sent in 2 observer teams. Our observer team was satisfied that the recount process was certified by the persons from the Guyana Election Commission and stood as a credible basis for the declaration of an electoral result. What is going on is a little bizarre, to say the least, but we shall wait and see and let the process play out over the next few days. But suffice it to say that there's a charter of civil society within Caribbean community that causes us to have to aspire to a very high level of behavior with respect to free and fair elections and with respect to giving full effect to the will of the people. I pray that we will recognize that there is no election that is worth the life of a single human being, that there is no election that is worth the damaging of the reputation not only of one country but our community.
And in Cuba, Agriculture Minister Gustavo Rodriguez has stressed that the first phase of the road to recovery post-pandemic is to increase planting as well as the production and marketing of food.
Rodriguez also highlighted the importance of increasing exports and processing agricultural products. He pointed out that among other objectives is to harvest more and implement laws to prevent commercial breaches by organizations. The minister further mentioned that food will be provided to vulnerable people living in remote communities. At least 35 people have died from the novel coronavirus in the last 48 hours in Panama, taking the total number of fatalities in the country to 547. Panama's COVID-19 statistic places the nation 20th in the world per 1 million inhabitants. According to the Ministry of Health, as this Sunday, about 780 patients were admitted into healthcare centers. 131 of them were placed in intensive care units, totaling more than 27,000 hospitalizations. There are currently 12,000 active cases. China has donated 10 high-tech artificial ventilators to the Latin American country, which the health ministry will distribute in intensive care units across public hospitals.
And these are the Caribbean news for today. Let's go back to you in the studio.
Cuban weatherman Dr. Jose Maria Rubiera Torres offered an explanation regarding the exceptional characteristics of the Sahara dust cloud that is currently covering the Caribbean region.
This week in the Caribbean, we suffer the consequences of the dust from the Sahara. As of Thursday, the phenomenon is moving to the Gulf of Mexico, Yucatan, and Central America, leaving behind the Caribbean. Now, why is this exceptional? Because every year there are dust clouds from the Sahara, even several times in the same year. But the concentration of this dust cloud is very particular. In Puerto Rico, for example, there have been several studies over the last 20 years, and no Saharan dust cloud ever had the power concentration that this one has. There are some specialists who say that in 50 or 60 years, this is the strongest Sahara dust cloud they've seen. But this particular phenomenon is also important because it arrived during the COVID-19 pandemic, so it can worsen respiratory conditions. Therefore, the use of masks is very important.
And we're taking a very short break now, so don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. 1.48 million US citizens applied for unemployment benefits last week, as applications for jobless aid declined just 5% in the past 2 weeks, a much slower rate of improvement than in April and May. According to the latest report from the US Department of Labor, new unemployment claims have continuously exceeded the 1 million mark for 14 consecutive weeks as a result of the mass layoffs in the midst of the coronavirus pandemic. The report notes that 19.5 million workers are still receiving unemployment benefits, even as the nation has been working to restart the economy. Former US Vice President Joe Biden has reportedly widened his lead to 9 points over President Donald Trump, according to a new poll. According to the CNBC All-America Economic Survey, Biden is in line to win 47% of the vote in the November presidential elections, with Trump standing at 38%. As far as the issues currently gripping the US, Trump maintains a lead when it comes to the economy, while Biden is ahead when it comes to racial equality, police reform, healthcare, and the pandemic.
When a white supremacist walked into Mother Emanuel Church.
The United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime has warned that the COVID-19 pandemic could increase drug abuse across the world. In its 2020 World Drug Report, the office predicted an overall increase in drug abuse due to the pandemic, with users likely to shift to cheaper products and injecting them, which carries greater risks. The office warned that countries were also likely to reduce drug-related budgets, which would make it easier for traffickers to operate. The report adds that rising unemployment and a lack of opportunities could increase the chances that poor and disadvantaged people turn to illicit activities linked to drugs.
So the trend in drug abuse and use has been increasing, where we have 269 million people using drugs, which is an increase of 30% if we compare 2018 to 2008. This is a very alarming increase. Not just the increase is in the amount of people using drugs, but there are more youth, adolescents, children using drugs. With lockdowns, we have seen less trafficking between regions, but we have also seen some change in the routes, so people are moving from land trafficking to maritime routes. In Southeast Asia, it hasn't impacted much, because also we have to remember that lockdowns in some countries were just for a few weeks. So while it has slowed down the trafficking, it has caused also a decrease in prices, because there is more available on the local markets. And this is a risk in and of itself, because when it's cheaper and available in more and bigger quantities, then more people are at risk.
In France, trade unions are demanding that President Emmanuel Macron intervene to reopen the Luxfer medical oxygen cylinder factory, which has been closed for a year. Before its closure, this plant was the only one in Europe to manufacture medical oxygen cylinders.
When is this company going to reopen? The state has to move. That's what I said to the mayor, whom I met last Tuesday. And to Mr. Macron, the state must now intervene directly, either through a buyer or by nationalizing this company so that jobs can be found on this site.
People in Europe have been flocking to parks and other public spaces as temperatures soar thanks to an early summer heatwave. But experts have raised concerns this will lead to further COVID-19 outbreaks. The European Weather Service issued a warning for extreme temperatures across the entire continent, with dangerous temperatures reaching Spain, Belgium, Estonia, Finland, Latvia, the Netherlands, Portugal and Sweden. Palestinian resistance organisation Hamas has warned that Israel's planned annexation of the occupied West Bank would amount to a declaration of war.
The resistance considers the decision to annex the West Bank and the Jordan Valley to be a declaration of war on all Palestinian people. The resistance in this war will be the faithful guardian in defending and protecting all sacred lands.
Iran has started building an oil pipeline that will provide the country with an alternative route for oil exports. On Thursday, President Hassan Rouhani welcomed the building of the strategic 1,000-kilometre pipeline connecting the Ghor oil field to the province of Bushehr to the port of Yask, located in the province of Hormozgan. The Ghor-Yask pipeline, which will extend through the Gulf of Oman, will mean the Islamic Republic will no longer be dependent on the Strait of Hormuz for its oil exports. And we have more stories coming up after this final short break, so stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. Pakistani authorities have suspended over 260 pilots as part of an investigation by Pakistan International Airlines into the authenticity of their licenses. The announcement was made by Aviation Minister Ghulam Sarwar Khan at the Pakistani Parliament on Wednesday. The minister noted that the pilots had suspect licenses as they had not taken their exams themselves. The decision came after initial results of an investigation into the crash of a Pakistan Airlines flight showed human errors. The Airbus A320 crashed in a residential neighbourhood near Karachi International Airport in May, killing 98 people. Meanwhile, a legal process to fire the pilots has been initiated.
54 में से 28 लोगों को शोकस दिए.
The UN Special Representative for Afghanistan, Deborah Lyons, announced before the Security Council that negotiations between the Afghan government and the Taliban will resume in July.
Members of the Security Council, I am cautiously optimistic that the talks between the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan and the Taliban negotiation teams will indeed start in the next few weeks in Doha during the month of July. As the two sides embark on what will likely be a long and complex series of talks, I have encouraged them to show the necessary flexibility and foresight, the commitment to peace, and most importantly, compassion for their people that will be needed to bring these negotiations to a successful conclusion.
Iraqi and Jordanian authorities held official meetings in Baghdad on Thursday to develop bilateral cooperation. The meeting was attended by Iraqi Prime Minister Mustafa al-Qasimi and Jordan's Foreign Minister Ayman Safadi. The two analysed guidelines to strengthen cooperation agreements in the economic, investment, commercial, defence and security fields. Referring to the Islamic State, the Iraqi Prime Minister noted that both governments will work side by side to combat terrorism. Tunisia's House of People's Representatives opened a dialogue session on Thursday to evaluate Prime Minister Ilas Al-Fahah's first 100 days in office. The Prime Minister presented a report to the Assembly's representatives, noting the country's success in tackling the COVID-19 pandemic despite its limited resources. The Prime Minister also announced that the unemployment rate stands at over 130,000. Moroccan authorities allowed the reopening of cafes, restaurants and beaches on Thursday as part of a government plan to ease COVID-19 restrictions. Meanwhile, Moroccan football leagues are expected to resume on July 24th. Prime Minister Saad Eddine El Othmani noted that the state of health emergency was extended until July 10th. As of Thursday, Morocco has reported over 11,000 coronavirus cases and 217 deaths.
We followed the health measures. A committee come to guide us. As you can see, there is duct tape between the tables and 1.5 meters and more between the tables. Also, there are hygiene measures more than before, and we're making an effort. Thank God we came today to see the sea, to take a breath after this curfew. Everyone is happy today and comfortable. Our country is beautiful. We are enjoying the clean shore of the sail, and they put the garbage cans around, and the police are here. We hope that everyone is aware and following the social distance measures, and everything will be fine.
The Minister of Health of the Democratic Republic of Congo announced the end of the country's 10th Ebola epidemic, which devastated the east of the country. However, authorities are still struggling to cope with the 11th epidemic, which broke out in the northwest at the end of May.
Dear countrymen, as we declare the end of this 10th epidemic, our country is facing its 11th, which was declared in Mdaka, Equator Province, on May 31, 2020.
Dozens of demonstrators gathered near Lebanon's presidential palace in Beirut as President Michel Aoun chaired a national meeting following protests earlier this month, sparked by a massive economic downturn.
It is a failing government. It is corrupt. It hasn't done anything other than destroying the country. We are telling them, all of you means all of you. You are corrupt. We don't trust you. We want to topple you. We want an independent and clean government to get this country out of its mess, this starvation, this poverty that they have created for us. To tell them that you don't represent us. You are a corrupt authority that has robbed us. You have been robbing us for 30 years and you are still stealing from us. You are here now to agree on how we are going to make us hungrier and how to steal more from us. The US dollar has become 4 times more than what it has been before against the Lebanese pound. People are losing their homes. Corruption? There is corruption everywhere in Lebanon.
TeleSur English is now reaching more areas across the Caribbean. You can find us on the following channel under the following settings. And we've come to the end of this news brief, but you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And you can also join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. For TeleSur English, I'm Katrina Goss, and thank you for watching.